Hello and welcome to the Pain Red Quarterly Slush File. Thank you so much for dialing us up today. We're having a very special episode, just like those, after school specials today, in that we are not going to discuss poetry that's been submitted to us, but instead we're just going to talk about, we're going to talk about the issue of the community that poets build for one another, and how we spread the word of the word and all of those things. We have some of the usual players here, but we have a special guest today, and that is Cynthia Dewi Oka. And we'll do a little self-introduction, I think, in another minute. So yeah, thank you. And as always, slushies, tell us your thoughts as well after you listen in. So I guess I will start with Cynthia, who, what we often do, Cynthia, is talk about where we're calling in from, zooming in from. And so you've got an opportunity to do that too. So hello, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like Kathleen, it's been many years. And PBQ actually also published like a number of my poems a few years ago, and it's just been a real joy to collaborate with you all. So I feel incredibly grateful to be here. I am calling in from Lenox, Massachusetts, where I just moved a few days ago to take up my role as poet in residence at the Amy Clampitt House. It's a very cool residency, so it's 6 months to 12 months, and it's funded, and you kind of just get to live in this beautiful house that used to belong to Amy Clampitt and write whatever you want. It's very new to me because I have been a mom for the entire time that I've been a poet, and I literally dropped off my son at college the day before I drove out to Lenox, and this is going to be the first time that I'm by myself, maybe ever.
Yeah, sure, maybe.
I'm just settling in. It's so new, but I'm grateful to be here and a little scared too.
Yeah. Well, we have Zoom. We can always chat if you feel lonely or the bears get close.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. And we have, sad to say, Marion Wren is back in Abu Dhabi. I guess I'm sad for me personally, but she's working all the magic out there. Hi, Marion.
Hello, Kathleen. Hello, Cynthia and Jason and Larissa and Kate. Yes, I'm back here in Abu Dhabi. It's almost sunset time here. And I'm delighted to be on the call with you guys to talk about poetry community. And Cynthia, I feel like we're some sort of virtual hug for you, right? As you're doing this sort of solo trek at the Clampitt residency, we are right there with you on this Zoom call and wishing you well and thinking about you and sending you community vibes. So from Abu Dhabi, I'm going to bounce it to Jason.
Hi, Jason Schneiderman. I am all kinds of discombobulated because I am babysitting nephews who don't really need babysitting. They're 14, they're fine, but yeah, I'm realizing how much parenthood takes up a lot of one's time, and as someone who's not a parent, I'm really thrown. My game is a little thrown.
14 is tricky too. Very
well, and I've taught kids that age, and I keep reminding myself that the thing about adolescence is they go back and forth between 7-year-olds and 30-year-olds.
Right, exactly.
It's not as though you don't get this middle stage, they just go, they toggle, and you get fooled, and you're like, oh, okay, and then no, and then they toggle back, and you're like, oh. Okay.
Yeah, when I was pregnant with my third, I took a semester off of teaching at college and subbed in the K through 12 system, just because I felt like I've never done this, and what would it be like, and I just wanted to taste that. And the middle schoolers scared the heck out of me. I thought I was going to have problems with the high schoolers. and that they would be like, oh, belligerent and, not doing the work or whatever. They were lovely. The middle schoolers are just so all over the place. There are kids that are going home and playing with action figures, and other kids that are, going home and smoking pot and getting laid, like all in the same room. So it's like,
it's very confusing.
Who am I teaching to?
It's very confusing. Yes.
Yeah. Are they identical twins? Just wondering about the.
No, they're fraternal.
Oh, good.
No, and they could not be more different.
So good. Then you don't have any creep factor also happening with those scary identical twins. Just standing in hallways,
there's no creep
that kind of thing. That isn't happening.
Yeah.
Good. Last but not least, we have Rogan Kelly. Hi, Rogan. Where are you?
I'm in Morristown. It's good to meet everybody.
All right, which Morristown? The north one or the south one?
Northwest New Jersey. So
Morristown, right? That confused me so much when I moved to New Jersey. That there were two. There's a Morristown down here too, closer to Philly. Yeah.
That not around.
So glad that you're here. And Slushies, we know you know how to Google. That's why we're not doing a straight up boring bio time, right? Because you know how to Google. So we should just get to the topic at hand, I think. And I think that no pressure, Cynthia, but I'm going to bounce it to you because you are in such an interesting place and have had different poetry communities in your life. And now here you are alone in Massachusetts. And does that worry you about the work? Or do you feel like you'll be able to better focus when you don't have people pulling on you for your time?
Right. This is a great question. And yes, I think community has always been a very integral part of my poetics. I actually started writing poems while I was a community organizer. So a lot of my earlier poems, I wrote for various initiatives that we were doing. Like we have an anti-gentrification rally. So and
wow, that's awesome.
Poet on deck, And so in terms of thinking about poetry and its place and its one of its roles being, kind of rallying people together, bringing people together, giving voice to a collective experience. That actually was the norm, I think, for me as a younger poet, and actually finding more of my own voice and centering myself more in my lived experiences, my own history. That's been the journey for me. It's been kind of okay, both things can exist, simultaneously. And the first writing workshop I ever went to, which was Vona, back in the day, was the first one I went to was 2009. I couldn't have gone. I was a single mom working 3 jobs. And it was my community who donated the resources for me to be able to go. That's so I really feel like I owe every, all my, even my capacity to write, to pursue the craft has been so interdependent with community. And it's very different to be here, to arrive in this place. And I also know that I'm at that point in my life where this is where I need to be. I've been juggling motherhood and work and the art and organizing for so long. And sometimes what gets difficult is hearing my own voice. And I think this is going to be a training ground for me to do that, because usually I'm hearing 12 other people's voices first before I get
I just put that down. I love the way you said that you're interested in hearing your own voice. That's
So I think this is going to be really a training ground for that, to kind of counterbalance the experiences that I've had up to this point.
Right. That's terrific. And since that's a nominated position that you have, your community is what gave you this year, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And like there's also like, I mean, we think about, there's like different ways to think about community, right? Like, I mean, Amy Clampitt basically decided when she received her MacArthur fellowship that she was going to use the money to like buy this house and share it with the community of future poets.
Right.
Wow.
And so it's like I am in a lineage of like, it's like a vertical community, like across time, that I am inheriting right now. So yeah.
Right. That's why there'll be only good ghosts at your house.
See,
Yeah, that's what I'm
I'm
thinking.
hoping.
Yeah.
Friendly ghosts.
That's wonderful. Jason, I'm thinking too about the fact that you've done residencies and, you've worked in various ways too. How do you think when you're enmeshed in something, it influences your work?
It's really interesting because I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with residencies is how much technology has changed them. That I remember being at Yaddo, and the only way to communicate with the outside world was the phone booth outside the dining hall. And when you were there, you were there. Unless and there was always someone who's like waiting for a phone call from an agent or, something sort of exciting. And I was really young at the time. But now I like just earlier this year, I had a residency and everyone, like we couldn't agree on a dinner time because everyone had, all of these Zooms and all of these classes. And it was really interesting to me. And it made me realize I've been really lucky, and I had another residency again later this summer. And I had to kind of like take a step to be like, oh, no, I can't, I have to be away. I can't Zoom, I can't, sort of have all of these forms of connection. And so the residency is kind of, I do feel like there's community spaces and isolated spaces, and kind of the way that we come together and the ways that we're alone have changed so much. Yeah. And I have always found residencies really valuable. I love that going away and being alone. And I realized that actually being alone might be harder than it once was. And I don't know, Cynthia, how's that feeling now that you're at the Clampitt House?
I mean, it's only been a few days, so do check with me a little bit later down the road. But it's felt really nice. And I love that you named it. It is difficult to be alone now because we're so plugged in all the time. Like I may want, in my mind to be by myself, but my phone is like dinging 50 million notifications. It's like, we're just so constantly in a barrage of contact. And I don't know, I think it requires almost like extra discipline or something to carve out the time. Like it feels like extra. I remember really appreciate, I had a residency at the Vermont Studio Center some years ago, and like it was similar, like there was no Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And it became like, it was like enforced by the environment that you couldn't have outside stuff. And I think that's good for like short period, for like for the birth period, for like a month or like 3 months at the most. But like I have been kind of reconsidering what that means here, because this is such a long one. I'm like, do I want to go without people for like 10 months? Like, what if I you know what I mean? I could be like a totally crazy person.
Right.
So how do you kind of maintain the balance that's a big question for me right now.
Right.
When Rachel Zucker once said that technology and cell phones have made us all moms because we're all completely interruptible all the time. That experience of kind of being, someone else can always be there, knocking on the door, like you can't even go to the bathroom by yourself. That technology makes us all mom. We all have that experience.
Yeah.
I hope you guys all see how my train of thought is going this way. But Marian, when she does her own writing, has always loved to do it in a coffee shop. And I can't do that at all. I'm very distracted. I like look at people's shoes when they come in and eavesdrop other conversations. But you've always wanted to be out in the world while you write.
Right.
there.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if you might talk about that.
Yeah, I also love libraries, right? And I feel like achy for those spaces because they're hard to enter into these days, without masks or with masks or with permission or without permission, with vaccines or without vaccines, right? So that third space of the coffee shop was always such a freaking delight just to go to, right? And sit and write and be. And I used to love going to the Rose Room at the New York Public. And just like sitting down at those long tables for hours, right? And just being with other people, but doing my own thing. And for me, that also carries over into more like impromptu or unofficial residencies or workshops. So I've long been like involved with writers from New York University's expository writing program, and we'll go for like what on the surface looks like vacation weekends, right? But we'll basically rent a big house, like 10 people will descend on that house. And then for 4 days, it's like that we're just in time with each other, right? We write all day and then we have these communal meals at night and then we share poems with each other. And every single time I go, I leave feeling like doubled down and committed to projects and feeling really lucky for those people in my life too. So yeah.
I was lucky enough to be hooked in on one of those trips once, and I found it just fascinating how well everybody did follow their self-imposed rule. We were like monks all day long. You would barely say hello when you went in the kitchen to get a coffee or something if somebody was working there, but then at 5 o'clock you'd hear the laughter would begin. Voices would start floating and coming together. It was really wonderful. Brogan, I know you the least of our panelists today, so I don't know what experiences you've had or what you'd like to speak about that, about just writing itself and how it's best served for you.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I feel like I know all of you. I think that we've been in and around the scene. I feel like I grew up at KGB and catching readings and see Jason doing his thing there. Yeah. And his partner gave me my first feature reading at the Ear Inn.
Geez, that's cool. Love these little connections. That's terrific.
That is a long time ago.
I was 20 years old and a fill-in. They needed somebody last minute. And
that's great.
But it was a wonderful experience. And BJ Ward was probably my first poetry mentor. And I was in college and doing a paper on poetry, and I called him up. I found his number in the phone book and called him up. And he talked my ear off for about an hour and about poetry. And then he invited me to this school Poets in Schools program that he was doing at the time.
Oh my gosh.
And to be, 20, 21 years old and see and be talking about the vitality and of poetry and how vital and necessary it is, and to see any of us who know BJ how full life he is.
Yeah.
And then to see him igniting a classroom of fifth graders, it was and that they were writing these poems and children are unhinged with metaphor and or grounded in that metaphor. It's wild. And that was kind of my base where I started from.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. What a call. Many other, only BJ would do exactly all of that, give you all that help and guidance. And he's always looking behind him to help people up. Yeah, that's really great. I'm not sure where to steer this next. I'm wondering what other, we've talked about the fact that we can't not talk about COVID, as Marian just did, and I don't want to focus on that. In fact, I haven't mentioned it yet, but this is an important topic, but the catalyst for writing it was Collingswood is having a book festival on October 2nd in Collingswood, New Jersey. And it's a street fair that's all about books and reading. And last year, the organizers did lots of things virtually, but they still managed to have a beautiful, amazing reading with Greg Pardlow as the keynote on the lawn in front of the Scottish Rite. And I just so appreciated that they did have that face-to-face time, you know, even though we wore masks and we're sitting outside. So what I've always loved about the Collingswood Festival that's very different than other ones, you know, when you go to AWP, everybody is like you, right? You're with so many like-minded people. When you go to the Collingswood Book Fair, because it is a street fair, and there's also lots of things for kids and food vendors and, you know, and all of that, I have explained to people what a lit mag is, right? And I love that because, you know, there are thousands of people who don't know, right? And usually when you go to a book thing, only the bookie people go, right? So anybody have any thoughts on that, on the importance of these public, like, I love that it's a forward facing fair. Let me use
Well, you know what, let me jump in on that and say one of the things that has been remarkable and a constant delight here in Abu Dhabi has been Dorian Paul Rogers' Rooftop Rhythms series, right? So it's a open mic event that they run monthly, right, at NYU Abu Dhabi. And it was big before he associated with the college, right? With the university. It used to be at hotels in Abu Dhabi, hence the name Rooftop Rhythms. And people from all over the region would just like come in and participate. And these were really like packed houses for poetry. Like it was such a surprise to, you know, coming from the US to see this kind of liveliness. In the last couple, like year and a half, right, since everything sort of moved online, the poetry series was on Facebook, right? So you'd think that would have like democratized everything and there would be even more people tuning into the series. But what happened is it sort of flattened it. It was somehow less special, right? Than that sort of communal space. So I think they're going to move it from Facebook to like a Zoom version, right? Maybe that's going to give them a little bit more specialness on the call, so to speak. But they're also, I think, and I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here, they're also partnering with the Louvre Abu Dhabi, right? So they're moving the series for a special event at the Louvre to activate that space, right, for this poetry series. And I just find that so fascinating, how space and place, public access, the status of certain spaces, right? You know, Kathy, my God, how many decades were we doing poetry readings in bars in Philadelphia? It was just like a necessary space for that kind of work. And then just to, I don't know, like I'm really interested to see how Dorian makes this move and how it impacts the collective, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, how many people that are there for a different reason float by, people who've never attended a reading before come in. Yeah.
But that distinction too of like, okay, so like a university is a middle ground, right? But like the Louvre is like an elite space. And, you know, Doc Watson's, for those of you who remember in Philly, right? Like was totally accessible, right? And so poetry in bars or poetry in museums, I think the spaces matter, which puts Collingswood Book Festival like square in the center of that. Like it's the street, it's the public street that is the space for the interaction.
One of the things that I've sort of complained about in writing in various places is that at the beginning of my classes, I used to walk into kind of a low hum of students talking, and now I come into complete silence. And now I'm actually going to be back in a classroom for the first time in over a year and a half. But what that told me was that there had been a time when the classroom was a place where students met and then kind of had new experiences as they interacted with each other. And that silence of the looking at the phone meant to me that they were communicating with people they already knew, that they weren't kind of meeting new people in the class, that they were kind of staying in the space that they'd already come from. And I was always very aware of how different cities were in terms of kind of the poetry scene. In New York, where I am and love and stay, The Ear Inn that Rogan mentioned, I mean, that was a very small space. New York, if what you care about is audience, if what you care about is having a lot of people in the room to listen to you, New York is a terrible place to read. Because one, a million things are happening every night. So you're competing with, just so many different events. And two, the poetry communities, I think, in New York are very, very small. I mean, they're these like little tiny eddies in this much, like the poetry community of New York writ large is enormous, but it fractures into kind of like a lot of really different small spaces, like whether you're in the St. Mark's crowd or the Bowery Poetry Club crowd, or whether, this crowd, that crowd. And I was always struck by when I went outside of New York, like Pittsburgh in particular, you'd give a reading and there'd be so many people there because that's the poetry event for the month. Like if you care about poetry, that's it for the month. And so outside of New York, the poetry communities felt very different. And there was a kind of scarcity that I often encountered in contrast to kind of New York's abundance. The other, and now I've been running, KGB for a couple of years with the number of other curators, Monday night poetry at KGB. And it's just really interesting to kind of see how those spaces, but having moved online for Zoom, one thing that I think is really interesting is that you never know who couldn't be there until the circumstances change and they can. And so Zoom created a kind of accessibility that we had a lot of people who, because that space is not accessible, right? I mean, it's up a flight of stairs, it's really dark, it's enclosed. And so I'm very aware on one hand of the way that kind of our move towards technology has sort of isolated us because we are often less open to these sort of, one of the things about the internet is not a library, because in a library, you find things you're not looking for. On the internet, you only encounter what you're looking for and what the algorithm keeps feeding to you that takes you deeper into what you like. Whereas in a library, you kind of accidentally find the book next to the book. And so it's doing this really interesting work that's really changing the way that we live and exist in communities.
And I've been thinking about just how much I miss being an audience member and being able to kind of reflect physically to each other when we're really moved by something. Just, like you can stomp your feet, you can clap, you can look at each other and give knowing looks. And like, I feel like that is something I've really missed, just kind of, because very often, even in readings, like I don't know everyone. Like if I'm coming as an audience member, definitely, like I may have some friends in the crowd, but like a lot of the times it's just like, it's just a random group of people. But there's this kind of, these kinds of like very intimate, if contingent connections that are purely kind of communicated by like your body language that I really miss, like the part that's like not even just the poetry. And at the same time, as a poet, as like a performing poet, I find that I used to get like really nervous mostly for the time, like I enjoy reading, but I would have a lot of nervousness for the period after the reading when people want to talk to you. Because sometimes I would feel like I'm in a different headspace and I'm like finding it difficult to like connect humanistically, not like robotically, like, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. And there's something that I have appreciate, and usually also because like I mentioned, I was juggling so many things all the time. I would feel like the second I finished a reading, I was like thinking about dinner.
Right.
Or my kid, you know what I mean? Or like, did he finish his paper for tomorrow? Or like, what is on deck for my deadlines for work tomorrow? Like, it's just like I then move into this other space. And there's something easier about like the Zoom interface because you're already set up like that, like you're at your workstation and it feels like there's less pressure on the transition time. So again, I feel like I may discover that I feel differently this year because finally I have some spaciousness, you know. So I also can't tell if like that was an effect, which is the fact that my life was so jammed up that I couldn't, when I came to read, I had a more difficult time enjoying the space around the reading. As you know, like not like if I came as a reader and I was just like hype manning people and just like really enjoying the language. There's just like, it was such a marked difference for me, depending on what role I was playing. So that's something I've been thinking about. And another thing that I've been, and this is not fully articulated, so anyone jump in if this resonates with you, it's just like, there's something about this current climate with like masking that reintroduces like anonymity. Like it kind of like, you know what I mean? Like when you have the mask and you're walking around in the city, like I almost feel like there's like a layer between me and everyone else. And I always like, you know, if I didn't end up a poet, like I would have wanted to be a spy. So there's something that I really like about just being in stealth mode about it. And there's something of that also in Zoom, like the fact that you have the option to like not have your screen on, or just like even the fact that there's like physical distance between you. There's like a screen, like chunks of your body are missing, that introduces kind of like anonymity, where I kind of like it as like a space of possibility, like anything could happen. Like when things are, parts of you are invisible and are like intentionally invisible in that way. I don't know. There's just something there that I've been thinking about, because it's actually, it's also sad. You know, I think the loss of physical spaces, I think, has been very difficult for a lot of us. And like a lot of us lost gigs too, right? Like when the pandemic hit, and that was like a toll. And so I've been kind of like trying to look at different silver linings. Like, are there moments of play inside of this, you know, new climate of fuck shittery? And the piece around anonymity has been something that I've been kind of circling back
to. I would like to jump in for a second and kind of add to this, and that I think I miss the physical space as well. And I keep trying to imagine a world where we kind of go back to normal, is such a loaded word, but
right.
But I'm assuming that I would imagine that the Zoom fatigue that we've all felt will create a period where we see less of it or very little of it at some point. But I do hope that the poetry community keeps doing a certain amount of it, because I think that through COVID, we have gotten this international community together. And I mean, I know even with my journal, The Night Heron Barks, we've had a couple Zoom readings. I was able to put lineups of poets together that I would never be able to do.
Right.
I got yeses from poets that maybe would not have given me a yes, but for the platform. And it's so hard, because I think that this is such quiet work that poets do, and the opportunity to be in person and meet people and read in front of people and see people is our moment to make noise, and that's so important. But at the same time, the kind of audiences that we're able to draw online, and the access, and this is a spoken art, and these are devices in which we can then speak that art through. I think is special for a lot of things, but especially for poetry.
Yeah, Rogan, Night Heron Barks, by the way, is gorgeous, right? It's a beautiful magazine, and the quality of the work there is just staggeringly good. And I love hearing you say that too, that these technologies allow you to get a range of voices in the magazine and also in your events too. And on the opposite end of that, Kathy and I've been around, for quite a while in the poetry world and community in Philadelphia. And Kathy, you know what I'm remembering? Lamont Steptoe and Poets and Prophets, right? Like 1980s Philadelphia, right? Like a group of writers who would meet at the Middle East Cafe, I think it was, like upstairs, and these writers would just come together and share their work on a weekly basis, and it was not quite impromptu, right? And it was a collective of folks from the Philly scene, that it was just an inspirational space for aspiring writers to feel like they belong to something aside from the space in their notebooks, right? And it just was transformative. So I just want to give a shout out to Lamont Steptoe. I remember that work in the 1980s.
That's terrific. Yeah, well, that's, I guess what we're talking about a lot is we sometimes get inspired, we sometimes get influenced, right? From our community. And those both can be positive and negative, right? You just have to be.
I'll say in response to kind of like some of what Rogan was saying about, particularly about getting bigger names and having sort of, more famous people who can sort of come to things because it's easier, you don't have to travel. And, at the beginning of the pandemic, that really worried me because I was like, wait, then it's all just television, right? Like if anyone can be anywhere at any time, like, then why be in Philadelphia? Why be in New Mexico? Why be wherever you are? And, that farm league, the people who are not well known yet, the people who are still working things out, who are using those readings, are we still going to be cultivating those voices if we're all kind of competing for the same national set of poets? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think the answer is that it hasn't turned into television, that it does have a kind of, there's still a kind of localness to it. And I think I've always been really jealous of actors who get to go backstage and take off their makeup, right? That there's a kind of necessary transition between being a performer and then going back to your personal life, and that dressing room and that kind of departure from the theater is kind of makes me a little jealous. But I know I do have friends who are really thrilled, particularly friends who have disabilities or pain that a lot of people don't really know about. And traveling is much harder on them than people realize. And that being able to kind of turn off the camera and just be home is hugely is hugely wonderful for them. Like, I mean, it really makes their lives a lot easier. I didn't want to record, and we've obviously been in this space. I mean, when everyone learned about Zoom in 2020, we all knew about Zoom because we've been recording Slush File for years on Zoom. So it was a familiar interface. And when we moved KGB online, I didn't want to record it because I thought that the aura, right, that Benjaminian aura would persist in being live. And I was overruled, and we recorded them. And actually, if you want to see the KGB readings, they're all on my YouTube. But Richard McCann read for us, and I'd known his health was poor, but he died soon after. And having that recording completely changed my relationship to the way we're using technology in the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you go.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to jump in on that too and say, like, our early days in the Slush Pile for us, part of it was because I left the States but didn't want to leave PBQ. So this, I mean, Cynthia, here's the truth behind the scenes. Like, I love Kathy and Jason so much. I just didn't want to stop. Right. So like, how do I stretch that? Right? Like, how can I stay part of it? And this technology allowed that to happen. So that's a very selfish sort of statement. But I wonder if Jason and Cynthia and Rogan, if you guys might want to talk about, like, like personal community? Like I know Jason has been involved with Ada Limon and Jennifer L. Knox for years as part of just a really robust and generous, nurturing group of writers. Like, does that, like when we talk, are we talking capital C poetry community or small c? And how does that work for you guys? You know?
Well, I'll start, but that particular relationship where we're kind of first readers and we're in pretty constant touch, it's usually through email and through texting. There's actually not a lot of Zooming. And so that relationship actually was a sort of wonderfully stable one for me that didn't really change during the pandemic. And so I've been really, really blessed to meet, you know, really great writers that I've stayed friends with. But I have mostly been a Zoom. I will not go to high holiday, like all the Jewish stuff. I didn't go to Zoom Seders. I won't do Zoom Hanukkah lightings. Like I've just been like, nope, I will not. And that hasn't changed yet. It may. But a lot of family stuff, like a lot of parties, like I've been to a couple of Zoom parties, and I'm not sorry that I went, but it's still drinking alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I clocked out on Zoom happy hours sometime maybe in the dead of winter. We like just can't do that anymore. It's not fun. Cannot do it. Yeah, I mean, I guess we all are saying too, if we could just keep the best parts of this as we, you know, keep on keeping on, like at Drexel, they have some courses that are high flex. So some people are on a Zoom screen in the room and some people are in the room. And, that would work so well for some of the things that we're talking about. We can still stomp our feet, Cynthia, and make noise, right? And nod and make those little body sounds. Like I'm sure all of us who teach miss just students breathing, the little chortles, the little, like, just that knowing that you are with other humans. Yeah. But we can still have special guests, talking heads from other places and people in the, and doing both. You can log in or you can come. Right. That would be nice.
Piggybacking off of that, I think one of the things that also is tied into this is accessibility and financial accessibility. And when we talk about making the community more accessible and more inclusive, there's no greater excluding element than financial. And I mean, AWP is sort of, the classic example of that, of a haves and have-nots and who can travel. And I mean, there's a lot of cost involved in that. And I do think that in certain cases, some of the technology levels some of that field, or certainly creates some opportunity. And that, I think that's important.
There's also, I mean, I teach at a community college, and I've been on sabbatical, but in spring 2020, I was asking my students, what's the biggest barrier to completing this course? And one of my students, she's a mom and she has 2 school-age kids, and they had 1 laptop and really spotty Wi-Fi access. And so I think a lot of times, like, we also forget that access to technology, that, like when I was talking to someone who moved, I was being mean, but they had moved their job interviews from MLA to Zoom. And I was like, oh, so you don't support MLA, you want to support Zoom. You think Zoom needs that support. And like, I mean, and I was being a little bit, I was kind of poking a bit, but I do think that, like, when we talk about accessibility, digital accessibility also require, like, we've transferred a lot of our resources to tech companies without really thinking about the fact that we were doing it, because it kind of feels invisible.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. I remember I was teaching at Bryn Mawr during the pandemic, and my partner was teaching at community college in Philadelphia. And the degree of like access, the differences of access issues that we face as educators were like completely opposite, because he was exactly trying to figure that out. So many of his students didn't have access to laptops, and how would he stay in touch with them? And he was making these kinds of like, just above and beyond accommodations for office hours, thinking about like when could people come over to like a cousin's house to use the thing after their kids are asleep and they have childcare and they finished work. So sometimes he was working until very late into the night. And I think about that too, because there's also just like the way in which this technology makes us, it like, if we have access to it, it connects us so much more easily, but then it also forces us to be like really, really flexible, or conditions us to be very flexible with our time and our boundaries, and, kind of just like being ever present. So I don't know, it's still something I'm figuring out and evolving with. There is something about it that feels like reminiscent for me. I've migrated twice, like first from Indonesia to Canada, and then from Canada to the United States as an adult. So I was like 10 when we first moved. But there was like that first migration, it was so total. Like the separation was like this, because there was like no internet, and phone calls were very expensive. Like it was like the death of a world. Like that's what it felt like. Like your world literally ended and you have to suddenly participate in a new one. The second time was like 2012. So there was, it was a lot easier to do phone calls. Like internet is like already normalized, blah, blah, blah. And there's like this kind of, so I feel like this weird pressure sometimes where now that everything, where for years I felt like I had to catch up to what was happening back home, because there was like this stretch of like blankness.
Yeah.
And now there's something about being able to be in real time with each other, where there's like less catch up on in like a vertical sense, but like there's so much catching up to do in the horizontal sense, and that like anything can be happening at any time. So I feel like I feel like my sense of time has been completely reorganized by the pandemic, and by the way that like we interact with each other.
Yeah.
My sense of time is dreadful. I have no idea when anything is happening. I am just like, and also because with Zoom, you can like, in the real world, if you're late, you're just not going to get there. You need like an hour to be there, and you're not going to make it. Whereas with Zoom, it's like, oh, it started a minute ago. And then,
but I just to connect these two things, Jason and Cynthia too, it's like, I think part of the reason I struggle with time now too is we're like stretched and holding different worlds in our minds at all times, right? So it's like you're holding your world and all of its constituents, spinning puzzle parts in that constellation, but then you're holding whoever's in Canada or in Singapore, you know what I mean? Like those worlds are with you, right? And I'm sorry, you said it was in Indonesia. Is that where you migrated from? Right. Yeah. So like you might be holding that world and this world and like simultaneously, and then which time zone are you in? Right. And which means no time zones or all time zones. Like it's all time, all the time. And that's hard.
All time, all the time. I remember thinking years back when we first started, when we went to AWP after Facebook and Instagram and all of that. And I thought, wow, nobody's going to have to catch up. What are we going to say to each other? What is there to talk about? Because I already know that you were in Denver and that you hiked this and all that stuff. Right. But I think, Cynthia, there is just something, all of you, so different about being face to face. You still manage to find things to talk about, right? Even if you know the social media facts about a person's life. Yeah. So I think we've been chatting a while, so I would like to throw out there, was there anything, like, knowing this topic, was there anything that we didn't cover that you were hoping to chat about? Anybody? Rogan, I have my question for you, because I think it is an important one and to do with community. By creating a new literary magazine, when, CLMP tells us that there's more than 6,000 at any given moment, right? And because some, literary magazines can be like garage bands, right? Where let's make a magazine and then they get bored and stop, or find out that it's actually work and stop. What did you see your magazine bringing to the poetry community that wasn't already served by other magazines? Does that make sense? Or is that aggressive?
No, I think that, I think to my shame, I came at it kind of selfishly. I was really only thinking of myself as a poet, and in my own poet life, and feeling that I was struggling to find good spaces and spaces that I wanted to be part of. And so I think that I sort of approached this not knowing what I was getting into. And I had some assumptions about what other journals were doing that I didn't think was okay. And then of course you start to build this thing and you realize, oh, that's why they don't do that. That's so much work, or that's horrifically expensive. But I think what came out of that is that I really started to care about other people's writing more than my own, which surprised me. And I thought that I know all those sayings. I had all those friends tell me, don't do it. There's too many already. But there aren't ever enough good spaces. And there are always poets out there that need to be heard, need to be seen. And I think that we do try to mix known poets with unknown poets. Mm-hmm. And we try to cultivate a very diverse space, and that starts simply with voice. And interestingly enough, suddenly, region, background, all of that affects the voice of the poet anyway. So you start to get that diversity. And we made a point to try to publish a large number of poets per issue, which has been challenging but rewarding. And I think that we wanted to create a beautiful space that was thought well of, that was hopefully, if it could be more accessible. I don't know if we've done that, but that's what we're trying to do.
I appreciate that. I mean, even with all this talk of community, so many people do still feel like they're writing into a void, right? That's, the main reason why we started this podcast was for exactly that reason, because we felt that maybe poets need to see how much time we do give each and every poem. And, we can talk for 20 minutes about a 6-line poem easily, right? We have to stop ourselves and go, oh gosh, we better move on. And that was really one of the biggest reasons for doing it, is to make poets feel, to let them see how much they're heard and how much we respond, right? I know that Frontier Poetry does a project where they do like an online workshop system. And I was helping them out with that. And almost every cover letter said, I just need to know what people think. I'm putting all these words on the page and I don't know what anybody thinks of the work, right? So I guess that's one of the biggest, that basic reason, Rogan, is I guess why every literary magazine starts, right? To give a space for writers that might not otherwise be heard. And PBQ, has always, we're proud of our democratic editorial system, which is another reason why we do this. And hope that we're as eclectic as you're talking about too, that there's people with books. And I remember one particular issue, I was really pleased because we had a poem by Greg Pardlow, and we had our youngest poet ever, I think about like 18 or 20. And it was their first publication, and we were like, that's all right. Greg got the Pulitzer that year or something. It was like, okay. So, well, does anybody have any other things they wanted to talk about on this topic, or should we say love you and see you October 2nd?
I think we should love you and see you, but I do want to say, I really want to, later, I want to have the conversation about the anonymity of the mask. I really want, I can talk to myself now when I'm in public, and there's no reason not to, because I'm under a mask.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. When we first started wearing them, I was scared. I remember being in stores and feeling really like threatened and intimidated by everybody else because of that mask. Like not just seeing a normal, just those little smiles you give each other as you pass in a store. Like I was just threatening. Always. I felt very threatened. Right. But anyhow.
I do want to add something quick to the magazine conversation, just
sure.
Because, as someone who came to poetry through reading, and not because there were poetry spaces that I could attend, but it was literally through books, through journals, through online journals that I was able to access, free shit, free shit that I can read.
Right.
I cannot speak enough to how much I appreciate the independent journals that are out there that are creating these spaces, where I also find often the most lively experimentation to happen, because I think the big the big journals tend to stick with particular formal conventions, and so I really also see them as kinds of hubs for experimenting with form, with different ways of communicating with each other. And so much of my community today, here, for example, a perfect example is the result of connections made through the journals and through the magazine space. And so I really, really feel it's, and I appreciate that now there's it's getting much more normal to have publications online. We're losing a little less of the fetish with the print form. I think that I've appreciated too, because I really relied on those. That's how I met. So I learned of so many different people's works.
Absolutely.
That I wouldn't otherwise have ever heard of. So so thank you so much to everyone here who does that excellent, good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for being here today and having this conversation. And if slushies, if anybody's in the region, do come to Collingswood. It's a train ride from Philly, a very smooth and fast train ride. And it's a cute little town, and it's a wonderful fair. And Cynthia is the keynote reader. I'm hosting an open mic. And Rogan, what are you doing?
We have 45 minutes in the tent right before Cynthia, so we're the warm up act to Cynthia's.
There you go.
Awesome.
You're curating a reading, right? You're
yes.
Yeah, and bringing your writers. That's wonderful. All right, so thank you. Slushies, let us know what you think about poetry and community and all of this, and masks. And thanks again. Woohoo! Bye.
Thank you to everyone.
Keep reading.
October 2nd.
October 2nd. Yep.
October 2nd.